Hey everyone, it's Jessie from b.a.r.e Flower Farm. Today we are going to do a late spring tour. We are in late May and we are hitting what feels to be like summer temperatures right now. So if you watch last month's mid-spring tour up here, you'll see a huge difference in terms of what the field looks like. A lot of these crops have put on a lot of green growth. Some crops are just on the cusp of blooming, and it'll be exciting to see the progression. But what I actually want to focus more on this video are mistakes that I've already made and the impact that it's had from a business perspective and what I'm going to do differently and about it. Now, these mistakes are particular to one, mistiming of crops and to the impact of having significant crop failure earlier in the spring, which impacted where I am tracking towards my sales goals and therefore what that means for the rest of the season. I think that this video is particularly going to be relevant for those of you who are in your earlier years of trying to sell flowers, whether or not you're doing this as a side hustle or you're just trying to sell a few flowers from your garden. If you've signed up for something like a farmer's market or you want to have consistent blooms to make mixed bouquets or even sell wholesale, the mistiming of blooms is actually a very, very important topic. And I feel like that even though I'm entering to my third year of flower farming, it is still something that I struggle with and that I'm constantly learning about. So we're going to talk in detail about that. Let's start first with my main focal of the entire growing season, which is lilies. Now, if you look behind me, I have a bunch of lily crates. I have a bunch of lilies that basically perennialize in these raised beds. Lilies are my main crop because I am able to succession plant them over time. I treat lilies as an annual primarily because I can succession plant them, and even though I can perennialize them, I've perennialized some, but I grow so many that it doesn't make sense for me to perennialize all of them. One, because I don't have the space to put them all in here. Deer love lilies. I have heavy deer pressure, and I obviously don't want to spend the entire space here growing lilies, so that's why I grow them in crates. But the second thing is that if I were to perennialize a couple thousand of lilies, they would all start blooming around the same time for me next year because they're gonna bloom naturally according to when they would normally bloom. So that wouldn't be helpful. Now, I do want to talk about mistake number one with lilies, so let me show you what's been going on. So here is my row of lilies. Many of these are lilies that I diligently succession planted every few weeks. And for those of you who are interested in succession planting lilies but don't want to buy wholesale like 400 varieties at the same time, I do sell lily bulbs in increments of 25 and 50 for that smaller scale farmer. I'll put the link in my website below, but I basically sell the same exact lilies that I grow. So I did have some crates that actually perennialized, meaning I left these crates outside. These had a flush for me in October, and they're starting to put on growth, which is surprising because where I live, we get enough cold weather where there are many freeze-thaw cycles, and the bulb still survived it, which is really great. Now you'll see that with the second flush over here, there's not as many buds because obviously the bulb didn't have enough time to regenerate since it was fall, or it just, it's just like a little bit of like a smaller bulb from like a daughter bulb that might be growing from. But this is still totally usable and totally sellable. So I am getting 2 flushes out of 1 lily bulb, which is awesome over here. Now, here is the problem. This is really, really great because I have lilies coming in over the next month to 2 months. Where I went wrong was this section over here. So many of these over here are Oriental Trumpet hybrids. The majority that I just showed you were LA hybrids. Actually, this is the dreaded scarlet lily beetle, which I need to kill after I film this. Actually, I'm gonna pause right now and go kill it. All right, sorry about that. They are a pain in the butt. If you live in the Northeast, they're an invasive that hopefully has not moved out beyond the Northeast, although someone in Michigan told me they had one, but you want to kill them because they have larvae, and I think that it basically commands another video, but I don't know if you could see over here, this leaf over here actually has larvae underneath it, so I'm gonna have to make sure that I manage that after. But anyway, so where I went wrong was with these OT hybrids. I had intended on them blooming by now, if not by end of May at the latest. I planted these in January. And typically, if you're gonna plant them in the winter, you wanna make sure you have an adequate grow space for them. My basement was still full of winter tulips, so I really didn't get a chance to grow these indoors. They rooted in the pole barn over there, and by the time my winter tulips were done, outdoor temperatures were good enough for me to keep them outside. There were nights where I shuffled them back and forth, but the point is that they didn't get the consistent 70+ Fahrenheit type of temperature that would have been needed in order for them to bloom by now. Now, the reason why this is an issue is because by the time these bloom, those perennialized lilies in that bed over there will bloom. I have another bed, and another bed over there. Whoops, just trying to get the gimbal to show you guys. But the point is, I have a lot of lilies that are coming in at the same time, including those that I had planted as succession planted lilies. And this is a problem because I can't push lilies completely wholesale, and I don't really focus too much on my retail outlet this time of year. So I'm gonna have to figure out how to push these lilies. I'm always up for a challenge in terms of selling lilies, but it's definitely one of those problems that I didn't anticipate on having. Now, what I want to show you are other things that are just coming into bloom. And these are things that I was hoping I could get a little bit earlier, because what I didn't show you was that I had harvested probably about 50 stems of lilies already. And the only things I have to pair with them are foxglove. I found that you can actually make decent looking bouquets with just foxglove and lilies, but it would have been nicer if I had some other filler type of things to give that bouquet a little bit more interest. The stuff that I have growing right now is all like tall in nature. I really wish I did end up growing something like Orlea and Blue Plurum this year. I didn't, and so as a result, it's making it a little bit difficult for me to make bouquets this time of year. But I want to show you what is coming into bloom, and again, the mistiming of things coming in together is making it difficult for me to make bouquets. So that's one of the learnings for people out there who have never cut flower farmed on a bigger level. Like, it's one thing to grow something in your backyard and be proficient at growing. It's another thing to make sure that you have enough of various things coming in together so that you can actually package them together into a bouquet. So this is second year yarrow. They were put in fall of 2022. Got great blooms from them. I have a total of about 70 yarrow plants, and you can see they've put on buds. This one's even coloring up. Problem with yarrow is that even though you're gonna see color, you gotta do the wiggle test with them. And even when this color's up, you still have to do the wiggle test because they are a type of plant that needs to be harvested later in maturity or else they will wilt. We actually have a few that are already putting up buds, which is super, super exciting. But anyway, so I was expecting these to come in a little bit earlier, which they are versus last year, but probably about, I would say at most a week and a half in advance of last year. This isn't the only yarrow that I have. I have some yarrow down there, which I'll show you, but I also have a patch of feverfew. Now, this feverfew was actually transplanted from the patch over there, which is no longer existent. It's where the tarp was. But if you've been following me, you'll remember that I had a huge thrips infestation last year, and it was actually on my feverfew. So what I did was I cut all the feverfew to the ground. I ripped out most of them, and for the ones that I still had, I transplanted them over here. I'm curious to see if they will have thrips or not, but if they don't, I love the single variety feverfew, the Magic series, I think it is, and I hope that I'll be able to get some usable stems. But you can see I've got a lot of filler in this row, more yarrow. This is again second year yarrow. I'll show you what first year flowering yarrow looks like. This is actually a double type of yarrow. It's called marshmallow. So I got this from chiliplants.com. This is just starting to put on growth, so we'll see how it goes, but it's a white double, and I'm pretty excited to see what that will turn out into. So more yarrow over here. Like, you can tell these are really, really robust. They've really, really filled out. I mean, we're talking about over here, this is 3 plants of yarrow. That's just really, really bushed out. So I'm excited to see how many stems I'll get from this. This is way more stems than last year. Not only is it more than last year, they're a lot taller. I mean, this is like 2.5 foot tall. Of course, the buds are coming in a little bit earlier, and I would say that some of them are even starting to split a little bit more, which I think is a sign that they can actually be divided. Now, I had already started dividing the yarrow last year in the fall. I divided a few clumps from over there and I put them over here, and you can see they're definitely not the same level of growth and output, but they are, of course, putting out blooms. Now, yarrow is one of my favorite crops to grow. One, because it does really well for us retail as well as wholesale. So it's very versatile in that way. But number two, it also has that umbrella-like shape with tiny florets, and it means that it is a very good attractor of beneficial bugs. So next year, when I divide out more of this yarrow, I'm gonna put it more around different places in the flower field to encourage those beneficial insects to come. The thing about yarrow is that I've learned, or I've heard from Lisa Mason Ziegler, that you want to restock your yarrow every couple of years. In fact, she does new plantings every single year because the genetics are such that basically by like year 3, certain colors will fade out and other colors will dominate. So I think she says that she typically only is left with like the white yarrow instead of the berry colors that she started out with. So I will be starting more yarrow, but I will also be continuously dividing this because I just love the productivity of already established yarrow that is just giving me more blooms than the year before. Next up, we've got the row of Nigella and bachelor's buttons. And this is exciting because even as of yesterday, I wasn't sure if these would bloom by next week, but I think this one is about to pop. I find that Nigella pops very, very quickly with the right types of temperatures. We've been having consistently warm temps over the past couple of days, and we had a little bit of rainfall this morning, so I think that the rain did this pretty good. And I also fertilized it yesterday with some Neptune's Harvest, which is a fish fertilizer. But here we have some bachelor's buttons. This was a bit of a test for me. I didn't plant that many because I've heard how difficult it is to harvest bachelor's buttons, and I think with just planting like 10 plants, it actually makes it a lot more manageable. But I really, really love the color of this guy. I mean, this is the Romance series, I think, from Baker's Creek. So it's got white with the pink middle, and this is kind of a bit of the opposite, more pink in the middle with white on the outer rims. So bachelor's buttons typically doesn't command a huge premium, but I think that if you grow the right colors, it can actually be a profitable crop for you wholesale, even though it's a pain to harvest. I just had an ant on my finger. But yeah, so we've got some more Nigella coming in. I'm really pleased that they put on a decent amount of stem length growth because I feel like 2 days ago, they were all pretty short, and now there's enough stem length for me to make bouquets with them. Over here, you can see my tiny patch of foxglove that I left in. So this was planted in fall of 2022. It's a hybridized variety that flowers for you in the first spring. So this is called Foxy Foxglove, and it flowered for me in spring last year. I got quite a few usable stems before they were overtaking my thrips, and I left them in, and they flowered for me again this year. Got quite a bit of stems. I would say probably got about 50 stems out of this small patch. I had already harvested them pretty clean, which is why I don't see a lot of color on here. But the point is that it was really great to be able to harvest so many stems off of a small area without needing to do that much work. So next year, I'm actually going to take out these foxglove, and I'm going to be planting something else in there. This was a mix, and I think that going forward, there are certain colors that I would grow versus having a mix. Next up, we have one of my favorites, which is sea holly. So sea holly is a perennial. It puts down pretty deep roots, which makes it drought resistant and just pretty much a maintenance-free type of crop. The difference between this and last year is the fact that this has put on so much more green growth and therefore so many more stems. I would not recommend this spacing. I think I spaced about anywhere from 12 to 14 inches. You should definitely give it at least 18 inches. I mean, there's about 60 plants here in about a 40-foot row, which is really, really aggressive. Despite all of that, we are seeing pretty healthy plants, and on average, each of these is putting on anywhere from like 5 to 7 stems, which is insane. Now, some of these stems are a little bit more on the thick side, so I don't know if you could see that over here. This is a little bit thicker. Oh, there's a ladybug on there. And then some of them are a little bit more manageable to use in bouquets. But sea holly fetches quite a bit of a premium when you look at it from the wholesale side. It is this beautiful blue that gives such a great pop, but also textural interest in any type of bouquet. So it works well both retail as well as wholesale. Now, the one downside about sea holly is that a lot of people complain about the smell. They say that it stinks. I honestly don't smell anything. I'm not a great barometer for smell because I find that I actually can't really smell too many flowers. I can smell stuff in general, but for whatever reason with flowers, I don't smell too much. So it's never been an issue for me. And last year, I would say I got most of my harvest in July. So now we're seeing that I'm definitely going to be getting a harvest, a good harvest within the next week or two. Like this stem over here is going to be ready pretty soon. I just need it to color up, turn blue. The center is going to turn blue before all of the other side bracts. But at that point, I can actually harvest it and even cut off these side bracts over here. So yeah, so I'm expecting to be swimming in sea holly pretty soon. I think this is a good time for us to pause because I've talked about 2 flowers that have already been flowering for me that I've been able to cut and use. And I've talked about a bunch of other things that are on the cusp of coming in. So here is where I realize a problem I'm gonna have. I'm gonna have a great first half of June when the yarrow, the feverfew, the sea holly, more bachelor's buttons, nigella bloom. Like, it's gonna be great. The problem is what happens afterwards. So the only other thing that I haven't shown you that is of significance in volume is my bells of Ireland. Let me show you what that looks like right now. So this is, I would say about 3/4 of the bells of Ireland that I got from plugs. I put these in early May. These should probably flower for me end of June, early July. Obviously going to be using these as filler. I have some more bells of Ireland over there in between the garlic. There's some crust going on, some sunflowers, but nothing in high volume. Now, the reason why I showed you my bells of Ireland is because that is really the only thing of high volume that I have that's going to be coming up after this flush that I'm gonna have, a peak flush that I'll have in early to mid June. I have some other stuff like agrostema as well as Chinese forget-me-nots. Those are a little bit more experimental. I just wanna see how they do when I grow here. But for the most part, I don't have a lot of other stuff that's gonna be in bloom outside of my lilies. And herein lies one of the hardest things to figure out, especially with someone who doesn't have a lot of growing experience, is not just the timing of crops and making sure you have a continual succession, but having enough in volume of multiple things so that you can do something with it. If you look around me, this is a fenced-in area. This is a 40 by 90 foot space. It's not small, but it's certainly not big. And it is very, very difficult to achieve high volume consistently. And one of the takeaways that I've had just farming for a full year and a half, and now we're going to a 3rd season, is that it is unrealistic for me to think that I can achieve high volume week after week in a space like this. I am starting to invest in perennials, which will help a bit, but I think that what I really need to do is take a step back and think about what are the months that I absolutely want to hit and just hit it out of the ballpark, right? These are the months where I'm going to have an abundance of everything come in at once, and I'm gonna go to the co-op, which is about an hour's drive away each way, and make sure that I have enough volume to bring. Because I'm kind of stuck in the same situation as last year. It's a little bit better where I don't have enough that really justifies the time that I'm gonna spend, the gas money, and also the extra burden of waking up early, having my husband basically be alone to take care of the baby and bring her to daycare and all that stuff. Like, there's a lot of hidden costs with me going to the cooperative, and if I don't have enough that financially makes it worth it, then what is the point of doing it? So I thought I learned that lesson last year. Obviously I didn't, because you can see the state of what's going on right now. Now, the good news is that because I have recognized this relatively early, I am making sure that I'm going to have a stellar summer. Now, again, if you've been following me, you might have noticed that last year I made a video up here where I talked about my sales goals, but also when I wanted to take a break in farming. I wanted to take a break in July and August. That is not happening because I had a pretty rough spring. I started off spring with having higher than expected attrition with my winter tulips through just inaccurate bulb holding. So March, I did not get as many tulips as I wanted, and that also impacted April. Some of the field tulips that I put in later also had failure. So long story short, I did not hit my March, my April, and my May sales goal was really, really light. The only reason why I had a decent May was because I brought in flowers for Mother's Day and sold it at a farmer's market. If I didn't have that, I'd be way, way behind my sales goal. So I kind of had a break already, like an informal break, and I'm pretty motivated and excited to get back into growing. So I have plugs coming in 2 weeks. I have plugs coming in 4 weeks. And so I'm going to make sure that I have a steady succession of things that will be blooming for me from midsummer all the way into the fall. So I think that this is a really good time for you to go outside and look at just what is blooming right now, what has gone according to plan, and what hasn't gone according to plan. And if you're someone who can look at your growing space and say, yeah, like actually, I'm going to have a gap after all of these things bloom. That gap is going to happen in July. A little bit late right now to address July, but we still have the opportunity to address late July and August, September, right? We still have the ability to start stuff from seed to buy in from plugs. I would say that if you are able to buy on the wholesale level and you can procure plugs right now, you can even help save your early July. So it all depends on just how quickly you can recognize these things and whether or not you can find plugs to help salvage the situation. All right, so I said that I didn't have a lot else outside of Bells of Ireland in big volume. I do have some other stuff that I had put in and didn't work out the way I expected. So over here, this is actually Scoop Scabiosa, which is one of the most expensive plugs you can buy out there. But I wanted to trial it because Scabiosa does really well at our co-op, and Scoop Scabiosa is supposed to be like Scabiosa on steroids in terms of productivity and head size. So I bought 2 trays, they're 50 each. So total of 100 plugs, and something demolished them. It was either a vole that kicked them out or a rabbit that wanted to munch on them. But basically, I probably have about 30 out of the 100 left, which is disappointing. But I think that if all of these are going to grow to full maturity with the amount of productivity expected, I should actually still earn a positive return on those plugs. It's just disappointing that, you know, they're only like 4 weeks in and I only have 30 left. The other thing that I'm doing is I'm interplanting vegetables over here, which you can see. Vegetables are important for us for just personal consumption. We eat a lot of tomatoes. I like to can tomatoes for sauce because we make a lot of pizza, lasagna, that kind of stuff. But I want to talk about some of the things that I'm doing differently this year. So this year I was on the hunt for foliage for vegetables that could double as just filler to sell to my florists. And this one is one that I happened upon. So I mentioned that I got the yarrow from chiliplants.com. Right now they actually have Moonlight Mile, which is this variegated tomato plant over here. And they just restocked it. So if you're interested, they actually ship nationwide across the United States. But I want to grow this out, obviously eat the fruit, but also then cut off the foliage to sell to my florists. Last year, I had significant success selling cherry-sized tomato stems with the foliage. And I think that this would be really cool for some of the florists to work with. I also have some peppers and some other types of vegetables that I probably normally wouldn't grow, but I like to see, hey, like maybe I can sell the peppers with some of the fruit. That's one of the things that our florists like to design with it. They actually like to design with some edibles. It gives their arrangements more interest. So we're gonna see how that goes. But as a result, I have a bunch of tomatoes, eggplants, and peppers dispersed throughout some of these rows through intercropping. So this is another good example where there's some Scoop Scabiosa combined with other stuff here. So the garlic will turn over sometime in early July, and then I'll have a little bit more space here to fill in with more plants. So I talked about mistakes that I've made already this year, but I also want to share mistakes that I had last year that I learned from and how that impacted me this year. So specifically, it has to do with weed management with thrips. Last July, I had to pull out basically all of my feverfew, except for those few plants that you saw back there, pull out most of them. I had to pull out all of my rudbeckia. I had a huge thrips infestation. It was the first time I had thrips on that level. And anytime you have a pest infestation, I think it's really important for you to consider or to answer a few questions. First is, how did I get this pest? Did this pest overwinter my soil? Is it capable of overwintering here? Did it fly here? Like, how did it get here? The second question you want to ask is, how quickly can it reproduce? What is its life cycle, but specifically its reproductive lifestyle? And the third thing that you want to answer is basically like, what are the methods of mitigation that work? What can you spray with if you spray? And like, just how do I avoid this in the future? So I learned with thrips just some things up because I have a full video on this, and I actually have an article that I'll link below. It's kind of like a primer on thrips, but I learned that thrips have an unbelievably short reproductive cycle. And it's one of those things where if you cannot manage it appropriately, then it will exponentially compound. And a part of that is also just based off of environmental factors. So I said earlier that we are now getting into summer temperatures. Thrips are like, if you had them last year, chances are you're gonna have them again this year. They overwinter most climates. The freeze doesn't kill them. If it gets really, really hot in your area, like above 100 degrees, that actually might kill them. But for the most part, they're kind of just chilling out there until the opportune conditions, which is around 50 degrees plus Fahrenheit and 70 degrees humidity. We've hit that. The hotter it gets, the more likely the thrips are going to hatch and come out. And so if you don't have rain and it's a very dry period, it's going to accelerate thrips production. And that's exactly what happened last year. We had a very, very dry June. Rain typically helps kill the larvae. It helps just manage the population a bit. So this week when I looked at the weather, I was like, crap, it's gonna be high 80s, like relatively high humidity like it's not high humidity, but it's like 70-80%. It's the sweet spot for thrips. They're coming out. So I've been diligently monitoring my plants to make sure that I don't see thrips. And so far I don't see anything, but the point is, I know they're coming. Now, I said one of the other things that you should answer is, how do they get here? And what I learned was that all of this clover over here, if you can see in the back, it kind of looks like snow in our grass. We've got a lot of clover. The guy who owned this house before us, like, we laugh. We're like, why did you buy this property? Because he hated the outdoors. So like, just like very little weed management and all that stuff. But the point is that thrips overwinter in weeds like clover. And so I had let the clover situation get out of control in the field last year. And what you can see this year is that I have way less weeds, because one of the things that I've been diligently doing is making sure that I am keeping that weed pressure down, adding more wood chips. So it's obviously helping with just general weeding as a whole, but really the first objective is to make sure that I have a lower amount of thrips that are gonna come into my flowers, which makes it a little bit more manageable for me when they actually do come out. So I wanted to make sure that I talked about thrips because we all have our own pests that we deal with. Most of us deal with thrips, but many of us deal with other types of pests. And I think that there's often this ready, shoot, aim approach where it's like, let me get out the neem oil or the Captain Jacks. And I'm gonna tell you right now, both of those are not gonna work with thrips. You can read in the article below as to why they won't be helpful in this situation. But the point is that I think that if you see recurring pests, it's really important for you to observe and take notes and basically anticipate when it's going to happen for you in the next season. So there was a great article that I read written by Rebecca of Moonshot Farms, and basically she was saying that they can now tell to like the week when certain pests are going to arrive in their high tunnels, because she's taken such copious notes as well as really understood the life cycle, the right conditions of these pests, and been able to anticipate outbreaks. And as a result, she is able to get ahead of those outbreaks. One of the things that more and more growers are trying to employ is integrated pest management. It is an organic way of managing pests without sprays, but IPM only works if you are proactive. So for example, with thrips, what that would look like is a beneficial nematode spray sometime in the early spring when it is still very cold outside. That spray would happen every few weeks. Then it involves ordering in mites or pirate bugs so that you have them coming in on a frequent basis. True IPM is very expensive. It's worth it if you have a high tunnel, but probably less worth it if you grow outside like me. And I came to this conclusion where I was just like, you know what, like, I'm just not gonna grow things like snapdragons, things that are thrips magnets, and I'm gonna try to manage the outbreak and basically wait out thrip season, because once it gets cool again, the thrips leave and then you start seeing aphids. So aphids are cooler weather pests, thrips are warmer weather pests. Now, I wanna end this on a high note because there is one success that I've had, and it has to do with snapdragons. Snapdragons are actually my favorite flower, but I don't grow them because of thrips. So what I did was I did a trial. I started seed in January and I intercropped them in my crates with the lilies. So the lilies are planted in sterile soil primarily because I had been anticipating on bringing them indoors. You don't want to use things like compost or just like non-sterile things because you might have a pest outbreak inside your growing area that's indoors. So what I did was I wanted to kill two birds with one stone because potting mix is obviously pretty expensive. I mean, I use Pro Mix, so it's not true potting mix. But then the other thing is that there's a lot of peat. It's not the most environmentally conscious type of resource. So I really wanted to maximize what I could get out of that. And this is what it looks like right now. The snaps that are interplanted in these lily crates are actually starting to bloom. Now, I had harvested around 12 stems already, so I'll show you what they look like. They are a little bit more petite in terms of the amount of like florets that they have, but the ones that I harvested actually look pretty decent. And so what's been really cool is that I got like very, very tall stem length, primarily because they're stretching upwards. I didn't have to net these. In another crate where they were just planted like half snaps and then half lilies, not as much success because they obviously were all wonky. So I find that if you're actually interplanting within the lilies, like you can see, like this is probably a 3-foot tall snap. It is able to keep straight because the lilies are helping keep them straight. Now, I think one thing that I could do better next year is I can fertilize them a little bit more and I can make sure that they stayed watered. So I was a little bit more diligent about watering this year, but still need to be on top of that. So you can see more snaps over here that are starting to flower, but this is exciting because no thrips in these snaps, and I got them a little bit earlier than I normally would. If I had overwinter snaps in this zone outside, I could still get snaps, but typically the length that I get is about like this at the most, which is about, I would say, 14 inches. So it's really cool to be able to get like, this is about, I would say, at least 2 feet tall worth of snaps. This is one of the things that I love about flower farming or growing as a whole. It is a constant learning journey. It's a great type of hobby and business for someone who is always curious and interested in learning more things. Now, one thing I do want to talk about is if you are just starting out, it can be really overwhelming because you're trying to figure out how to grow things, how to time things, but you're also starting a business. And I think one of the biggest watch outs for earlier flower farmers, as well as just, again, people who are looking to sell flowers that they're growing out of their garden, is treating it like a business. And when you treat flower farming like a business, it means that all of this stuff that I'm talking about and doing out here is a fraction of the total pie of time that I spend in this flower farming venture. You need to be spending time on marketing, on finding different sales outlets, and really having a business plan. You need to be doing some of the administrative stuff that none of us love, but the point is that 90% of your time should not be out growing. It should actually be on the business side. And I know that sometimes the business side is a bit of a struggle for people, like where do I start? I actually just launched a free newsletter where it's sent out every other Wednesday. And in that newsletter, we have a little bit about business related stuff. So we talked about branding and the about page in the most recent newsletter. I also talk about something that's a little bit more timely. So we talked about thrips in that one. And then I also talk about things that I'm reading. So it could be related to business as well as growing. That's a great free resource for those who don't know where to get started, but want to be sure that they're on top of marketing, selling, and having a business focused mindset with this venture. Now, for my Patreon supporters, look out for an article because we are going to dollarize these crops that I talked about. We're going to talk about how much is this 40-foot bed worth here with the sea holly. I talked about how it fetches a decent premium, and I'm going to talk about what that looks like for me in my local market. So lots of really good stuff. Despite the setbacks, I am still excited. I am still motivated, and I hope that if you've had setbacks, that you can take those as a learning and use that to fuel yourself to do better, because the season is nowhere near over. We have a lot of time left to course correct. So happy growing, everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.